This is Change the Narrative, the podcast about innovation in work, life, and culture. I'm your host and tour guide, Michael Hernandez. One of the biggest questions first-time authors have is, what is an editor? What do they do? How do I work with one? What should I expect from them as far as support of my writing process? And so I thought I'd dedicate this episode of Change the Narrative to that process. And so I'm going to pull back the curtain on what it's like to work with an editor and talk to an editor from a publication. So I'm very excited because this editor actually worked with me on my first book, Storytelling with Purpose. And she has a lot of great advice for first-time authors and what you should expect and what you should be prepared for realistically when working with an editor. So Stephanie Argy is an editor, writer, designer, and all-around storytelling professional. At the International Society for Technology in Education, or ISTE, she edits books, including my book, that help educators transform learning. She also freelances for other publishers and organizations, and she currently serves on the board of directors of the Editorial Freelancers Association and the DEIJB Committee of Sisters in Crime. Stephanie has made award-winning movies and written extensively about the art, craft, and technology of filmmaking. She is now developing her craft as a writer of historical mystery novels and as an urban sketcher. She has a bachelor's degree in history from UCLA, a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University, and a master's in writing with a specialization in book publishing from Portland State University. And I spoke to her from her home in Paris, France. Stephanie Argy, it is so great to talk with you. You were my editor for about 2 years, although somebody told me it was 18 months, but it seems like 2 years. And so I'm really great to talk to you almost a year out from finishing the book and publishing about the publishing process and about the writing process, and to hear the editor's perspective of what it means to write and publish. So thanks so much for joining.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here and so proud of you and the book. So an extra honor.
Yeah, thanks. Cool. So I'm sort of curious. You have a life before you were an editor. You were a writer, I believe. Can you tell me a little bit about your writing and what kinds of writing you're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started basically as a journalist. I got a master's degree in journalism. I've always loved writing, always loved reading. Got a master's actually at the suggestion of James McBride, who was a composer on a musical that I production managed. And he told me about the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia. And I said, sounds good. So I went there. And because my other passion at the time was cinema, I became a journalist and I wrote extensively about the art, craft, and technology of filmmaking. I love all of it. So cinematography and visual effects and post-production of all sorts. And I got very interested in filmmaking, so then I started making movies of my own. I co-directed and co-wrote them, co-produced a lot of them, working with my boyfriend Alec, and that was amazing. So my writing at that point was mainly fiction, mainly screenplays, mainly for movies that we then made, and we traveled around the world with those, and that was very exciting. And that led to editing in a funny way, because I began to chafe at the boundaries of cinema. I wanted to tell bigger stories. I wanted to expand beyond that window of film. And I started thinking, well, it would be really good to have the story carry on into books or into apps. But I really didn't know anything about books or long form writing. So I thought, well, time for another master's. So I went to back to get another master's degree in book publishing. And that was what led me to the International Society for Technology and Education.
That is a wild journey. And you know that I have a background in film. I have my master's degree, my MFA is in film production. So it's definitely a long history of thoughtful writers and film critics turning into directors like Jean-Luc Godard and the French New Wave guys and all that stuff. But
Truffaut, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So you landed and you are now at ISTE, we call it, International Society for Technology and Education, which merged with ASCD, where I published my book, Storytelling with Purpose. And can you tell me a little bit about that publishing house? Because for folks who aren't familiar, I guess every publisher has sort of a certain specialty or audience that they work with. Tell me a little bit about ISTE Publishing and who you're publishing books for.
Right. So as you mentioned, ISTE and ASCD merged at the beginning of 2023. So there are actually two separate book teams at this point. We're sort of, beginning to and become intermeshed a little bit, but we're still kind of two different imprints. So ASCD has traditionally focused on pedagogy and on people in a leadership role. The ISTE Books team has tended to focus more, like the rest of ISTE, on the really wise and constructive use of technology, of ed tech in schools, mainly in the K through 12 level. And we're a small team. The ISTE Books team is very small. We are a team of 4, small but mighty. And we publish maybe, I would guess, like 12 to 15, depending on the year, 12 to 15 books and other products per year. And because we're small, we're unusual as a publishing team in that we're very not siloed, we're very not specialized. We all edit, but we all also do different things. And I love that aspect of it. I love being a generalist. I love being able to edit, but also think about very deeply about design, and also you think about the metadata. How do we optimize the metadata for our books, and how do can we help the authors with their marketing? So we really do a lot of different things, which makes it very, very exciting. I'm Val Whitty, who I know you interviewed, is our acquisitions editor, but I also get to help with her, and the team as a whole gets to weigh in on all of the books that we're considering. So that's exciting as well.
Wow, that's wild. I imagine working with a small publisher allows that flexibility and that sort of maybe more personalized sort of feel that you might not get at a larger publisher. So I guess, that's definitely a benefit to that. And the irony is not lost on me that an education technology company publishes physical books, including my book about digital storytelling.
Yep.
So tell me about that. Like, why not? I mean, I know there's like an ebook version of all of the books, but why is it important to have like a physical book as opposed to a digital book or a website, something like that?
I think for many people in general, but I think especially an audience of educators, people still really like paper books. They like to have access to digital, but I think people are used to outlining, they're used to marking up books, and there's a reassuring tangibility to a physical book and a beauty to a physical book that people still enjoy. And as you said, we do have ebooks for everything that we publish, and sometimes we do special things with them, like with your book. The print book was black and white inside, but with the ebook, we were able to make it full color, and that's really nice when we can do a little extra for that. But we still, even with that, we still sell a lot more print books than we do ebooks. So.
Wow! Plus, books just have a great user interface and an incredible battery life.
They do. They're a great machine, and they are it's so easy to access any part of it instantly.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so I'm curious about the publishing and authoring process for folks who are new to it or have never experienced this yet. Because when I came in, I was like going in blind. I had no idea what was the next step in front of me. And I kind of like to see the big picture, a roadmap, I guess, of like where I'm going so I can sort of prepare and plan. And is there something I need to do in this step of the process that's going to impact or ripple out 2 or 3 or 4 steps down the line that I want to make sure that I'm aware of? So I'm kind of wrapped that way. So like in a nutshell, could you just kind of quickly give sort of a brief roadmap, I guess, a step-by-step sort of arc of the publishing process?
Yeah, absolutely. So it starts with acquisitions, of course, and the acquisitions process, I think, can be longer and more involved than people expect. I think a lot of authors think that they will send their proposal or their manuscript and we'll read it and we'll say, yep, done, book, let's do it. And it's not quite like that, because we might see a lot of promise in something, but we also like to think that we know our audience very well and their needs well, or we might have an insight into, we had a book that was similar, but we found this gap in it and maybe this book could fill it. There are different factors that go into our decision to acquire the book. And so Val very often will work extensively with a prospective author to say, this this section of what you presented is really promising, and we would love to see a book on that. Maybe not so much this other section over here. Can you develop it a little bit more? So there's guidance before the book is even acquired. And in the case of ISTE, there's also a peer review process at the proposal stage. So it goes out to peer reviewers, and we ask them, does this book address a need for you? Do you feel like this is original? All of those questions. So that factors in. So once the book, it goes through all of that. We decide, yes, we want this book. We make an offer to the author. If they accept it, we make a contract, and then they start working on the book. And while they are drafting, the first thing that we do is decide on a title. And the title is almost never what the author thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
So there are all kinds of conversations that go into it, and I'm sure you remember we had a very long titling process.
I think you almost canceled my contract over just choosing the title. It took so long to figure that out.
but it was right. It's such a good title, and you want that. You want it to really evoke emotional responses before somebody even picks up the book or buys it. So that we do put a lot of thought into that. And then two things are happening simultaneously once we have the cover or the title for the book. On one hand, the author is working and they're drafting. And some authors really like to work on their own, create a first draft. Other authors want to work with their editor and check in pretty regularly and say, here's a chapter. What do you think of this chapter? Is it going the right direction? And there's no right answer to that. There's no right, it really depends on the author. And so that is happening. And meanwhile, a cover is being designed. And we share back and forth with the author, say, have a look at this cover, is this capturing it? Some authors are very interested in the cover, some authors are, cover, great, just do what you need. And that design thread goes on. Once we have the cover, then an interior designer will start working with that and thinking about what elements can be incorporated into the interior. Now, back on the editing side, so the author is drafting away, is writing away while all this design stuff is happening. And they turn in a first draft. And I think one misconception that a lot of new authors have is that has to be perfect, that's done. No, that's the beginning. That is like the first beginning step, and it's going to change a lot from that point. Because once the draft comes in, it goes into developmental editing. It goes into another round of peer review, but meanwhile, sometimes the production editor like me, sometimes an outside editor will be going through it on a big structural level and saying, not even looking at the language very much, but saying, really, I think this chapter should be over here, and I think you need to have a whole thread about this that you haven't done, or you need to remove this whole concept. And that goes back to the author, so they can make another pass.
Okay, and so so just so I'm clear, developmental editing is not about spelling and grammar and punctuation. This is about content, organization, what belongs, what's missing, what needs to be cut, if it's redundant.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly. Does the book start in the right place, or does this contextual, would this chapter, former chapter 7, work as a really good contextual chapter at the beginning?
And then as the author is writing, you said they turn in their first draft. I remember submitting groups of chapters, like maybe 3 chapters at a time. Is it typically broken down that way as like steps like that? Or would it be like they just write the entire thing and hope it's working? Or does it depend on the author and the book?
It depends on the author and the book. From my experience, I think it's great to do what you did and to just do phases along the way, because then there's that ability to have a conversation and check in and say, I think, this is working really well. This is, maybe if this section here became more like that, I think we'd be on a better path.
Yeah.
So I think, especially for a nonfiction book like this, it really helps to have the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I think, I know this is kind of part of the developmental work as well, is helping the author to recognize and welcome their own voice. I remember that was a conversation that you and I had as well. That was the question of, well, should it be more serious and academic, or should it be more conversational? And I don't take any credit for the voice, but I do take credit for maybe giving you some permission to use your incredible, wonderful, expressive, personal voice to make the book that much more accessible and more welcoming. And I'm so proud of the voice in that book that you were able to find. So yeah, that's part of developmental editing as well. It's not a line level thing, but it's an overall, this is a really good voice for this book. What if we did that?
That's great. Cool.
So once you go through the developmental stage and the author does all of that work, then it goes into copy editing. And so then generally that's somebody that we bring in outside. We have a lot of freelancers that we work with, and they'll go through it on a line by line level and put a lot of queries in the margin and say, this paragraph here seems redundant. It seems like you're repeating what you did in chapter 2, or this is confusing. Is this what you meant? And then I'll go through what they've done, and certain things will be like, yeah, there's a comma missing here. Let's put the comma in. Or, that's a misspelled word. Let's fix that. I can accept that. But then I give that copy editor draft back to the author and say, okay, you need to address all these queries. And the author goes through it again. And meanwhile, over there, the designer's been working away, and they've got a really great template for the interior. And after the copy editing happens and the author responds, then those two strands come together. And the now beautiful, almost perfect text will be wedded with this design that we have come up with, which is derived from the cover that we all really like. And that was from that point on. We close the door on Word. We close the door on drafts that the author is working on, and it becomes something that looks like the book. So the designer creates the interior of the book, puts in all of the images, styles everything according to the way we've set up the manuscript, and sometimes gives us chapters that we look at a little bit at a time. I think we did that with your book, where we could see just a little bit and say, this subhead is really unclear. I can't tell that this is a new section, or I can't tell that this is a subsection of the one up above. Can we fix that so we can address things?
Yeah, and I feel like it was hard maybe for my book because I had so many images, what they call figures, and subsections and sort of call outs, like little boxes with asides that maybe another type of nonfiction book wouldn't need, where it's just straight text and there's really no illustrations. So maybe it's a little bit hairier for us to deal with that. Cool. And then, so we have that layout, and then what are some of the last steps then of the process?
Then, once all of that is in place and we're pretty sure it's good, we put it through proofreading. So it goes to another person, usually a freelancer or sometimes somebody on staff, and they do a proofread. And at the same time, it goes back to the author and it goes to the editor, like me, and we're all three going through it, looking for errors. And it's just amazing how many errors there are, even though it's been through copy editing and we've all looked at it 55 times. There's still things that we catch, and we mark it all up, and I take all of everybody's comments and put it together in one PDF that goes back to the designer for her to remedy all of those things. And sometimes it's, why is there just one line on the bottom of this page that looks really ugly, or, all kinds of things in addition to typos that we catch. And then that proofread, cleaned up version goes to the indexer. So that's like the very last phase. And some indexers are also like really good proofreaders of the final proofreader, and we'll catch things as we go. I have one indexer who did your book, who always catches a few more things. And the index gets added, and then it goes off to the printer. The same version that goes to the printer also goes to the ebook developer. So those things are happening at the same time. And we also create a print-on-demand version of the book, so that in case a book sells out, we know that we can immediately run an order if we need to, or if we just like that as insurance to have a print-on-demand version.
That's a great summary of the whole process. And I do want to get to marketing here in a little bit, but maybe I want to jump into a couple of things you said I have questions about, and then also talk about working with an editor if you're an author. So you said there was a peer review, and they're both at the beginning of the process and then also later in the process when we had a pretty solid manuscript. So who are these readers are they like a jury of your peers selected randomly? Like it'd be some, how do you find them? And does the author play any role in that? For example, if you've got a really narrow expertise, should you say, hey, I need these people from these universities or these organizations to read it? Or is that too much conflict of interest? I mean, it was kind of anonymous, so there was no ill feelings between anybody. But can you tell, how is that selection process done?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, there are two different phases. So there's the proposal peer review phase. And in that case, we really try and keep the text as anonymous as possible because we don't want, this is my best friend, I think his book should be published. Yeah. So we try and keep out, I'm sure people recognize someone sometimes, but and those, we draw the reviewers largely from the ISTE community. So sometimes it's community leaders, or sometimes it's I've had really great luck going onto ISTE Connect, which is sort of a bulletin board for ISTE and ASCD members, and I'll look, I've got a book on AI, who's really active writing about and researching AI, well maybe I'll approach them. And people are generally interested in doing this because it's a fun thing. So we go through the peer. So that is just people who hopefully have some expertise or knowledge, or at the very least interest in the topic area, and they're advising us on whether or not to acquire the book. Then once we have that first draft in, we do actually two different kinds of peer review at that point. So we do another round with these sort of subject area experts or people, and sometimes if there's a particular area that maybe some of our regulars don't have experience in, I might ask the author, well, is there anyone that you think or anyone you'd love to have look at this? And then we'll seek them out. So I just recently did a book. We have a really cool book coming on EdTech for multilingual learners. And we've never done really a book on that, and we didn't have a lot of people with that expertise. And so there, I really did a bit more research to reach out and ask the author for suggestions, and even let him do a little bit of his own focus group stuff on the side.
Wow. Talk about niche market. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it's very, there's a lot of good stuff in it that will go beyond that. If somebody is a general area teacher, but they have multilingual learners in their class, it's also really useful for them.
That's great.
And at the same time, we are ISTE, and ISTE has a set of standards which are used by states around the country to help them adopt technology more wisely. And so we also have each book reviewed from the perspective of the ISTE standards. Does it address some of these standards? And we have a whole set of reviewers for them. And we draw most of them from the ISTE certification program, because those educators who are ISTE certified educators need points each year to maintain their membership. And they can get points by reviewing ISTE books. And now we started a really cool process, because more people want to review books for the ISTE standards perspective than that we need. So now they apply, and as part of their application, they put in, I'm an expert in this, I love this, I want to review this book because, and it really gives us the ability to not only get great standards reviewers, but also great subject area reviewers.
Interesting.
So that's been a huge boon to the review process.
Okay, and so for folks who are not familiar with how ISTE or ASCD works, this is a paid membership professional organization that you belong to, and you're drawing these reviewers from that membership who actively are saying that they want to review them. So I imagine a parallel to this would be like, a state bar association for lawyers, or a union, or I don't know, there's real estate organizations and all kinds of professional organizations you belong. And so a great reason to be a member of an organization, and also for marketing later, because you've got a built-in audience of people who are sort of like your peers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's a really good point too. Okay, so before we get to the marketing and how do we sell this thing, just sort of curious, what should an author be prepared to bring to a publisher when they're pitching an idea? And I've heard different things speaking to different people and different editors. Sometimes they say, I just need a table of contents outline. I need a sample chapter or two to get a sense of your voice and your style. If you haven't written a lot before, writing that is, what is it that the acquisitions team needs, sort of in a nutshell, and what should an author be prepared to do and to bring to a publisher when they're pitching their idea?
Okay, so I'll just do one little quick aside, which is fiction. If it's fiction, they need the whole book, all of it.
Okay.
Because that's fiction.
Yep.
Nonfiction is almost always sold based on a proposal. So from the ISTE perspective, it's a fairly standard set of things that we like to see. Most publishers of nonfiction will want to see similar. So yes, a table of contents, a very detailed table of contents, along with an overview of what the book is. Why this book? Why does this book matter? Why is it necessary? What role will it play in the world, and especially within the community of, in our case, educators who are interested in using technology. But also, very importantly, why this author? Why is this person the best author to write this? It's like maybe somebody notices that AI is a hot topic right now. Yeah. But if they haven't done anything with AI, then why should we give a book assignment to them if they don't have a demonstrated expertise? So the author is making the case for the book, for themselves, demonstrating that they have a view of what this thing should be, what the structure should be, and yes, definitely sample chapters, because we want to see that they can express themselves well, that they can string together a whole chapter in a coherent way. And then, very important, as part of the proposal, we want to see marketing ideas. We want to see how the author perceives this book in the wider world, not just I think it'll be great, but who needs this book, and where does it fit with books that are like it? And I think we've talked before about comp titles and how there's always the question of what are comparable titles, what are books that are similar to this. And the thing that breaks your heart when you're looking at a proposal is if the author says to you, there had never been a book like this one, this is the only one, there are no comps. And all you can say is, A, you're not following our guidelines, and B, you're wrong, because there's always been a book that can be compared to it. And it's not like we want to see the comp titles because we want to reject it. Oh, what do you mean there was a book like this in 1968? Well, we obviously can't publish it. We want to know, we want to see that there have been books like this, and they sold well, and yet this one will be, it has its own take on that subject. But it's also, how well did that sell? How, if we're thinking about doing this, is this going to be a book where we can sell 2,000 copies? How can we price this book? If we think we might sell X number, then maybe we'll price it differently. Or, do these books tend to go to a skew younger? Do we want to price the book lower for people who might not be able to afford it? There are all kinds of reasons why we want to see comp titles. So it's super, super important.
So part of the research that you have to do is also what's out there, what's been done, and how is yours adding to the conversation rather than just copying or being an update to something that's already there. Yeah, that's
exactly
a really great point. Okay, so through this conversation so far, you've sort of convinced me why it's important to work with an editor and a publisher as opposed to self-publishing. And I have spoken with, in this podcast, people who self-published. And everybody has different experiences with their editor and their publisher depending on their book and who their publisher is and things like that. But you've made a really good case for the design piece, the perspective, bringing in, people to review your book who are peer experts, layout and design, copy, editing, all that stuff that a first-time person, especially a first-time author, would have no idea where to start. Remember we had conversations about how to do Amazon, posting and content and stuff like that. And having no idea, I think you've definitely made the case. But why would somebody, I don't even want to go there. Why would somebody choose to self-publish? Because it's sort of self-evident.
No, go there. Absolutely.
Well, you tell me. Why would somebody self-publish? Why would they choose to do that?
Well, as you as you mentioned, or as we talked about earlier, I got my second master's specifically in book publishing. And on day one, class one, this incredible instructor that we had for like introduction to book publishing, first question was, why are we necessary? We book publishers. Why wouldn't somebody self-publish? And there are a lot of reasons why, even now, as somebody who works for a publishing company, I would say, yeah, self-publish. Because there's a great deal of freedom that comes from self-publishing. Honestly, if somebody is really good and entrepreneurial, they stand to make a lot more profit if they self-publish. And there's a timeline that a person can set independently if they are self-publishing. If you are publishing with a larger entity, there are reasons your book might take a lot longer. Some of them are unique to the book. Well, we need X amount of time for editing, for design, for many, many things. But sometimes with a bigger publisher, it might be, well, we have this book on storytelling that's coming out in 2 months. We're going to wait on yours just a little bit longer because we want to, open a space for it. Many, many reasons. And but I think, as you said, the biggest piece to me, the biggest reason is the experience and support that a publisher can give for that editorial piece and for that design piece. And I'm on the board of the Editorial Freelancers Association, and I know that an author can absolutely hire editors to do all the pieces that we do, can hire designers to do all the pieces that we do. It just takes a very, again, entrepreneurial energy and a willingness to take on all of those pieces. I like to think that we as editors have been through it a lot, so we can say, oh, let me do all this juggling. I'm familiar with the timing of these pieces. So, that to me is a reason to go with an established publisher, along with the community that comes with it. Obviously, with ISTE or ASCD, there's a built-in community. So,
it totally makes sense all the way around. And I know, I felt like for me, like I wasn't writing about vampires or something that was really like trendy that was going to make a ton of money anyway, and so maybe I had a different purpose for choosing an editor. But that's something I'll talk about in another episode of this podcast. Okay, so let's get to the nitty-gritty of the writing and your perspective on working with writers, because it can be very challenging and very grueling process. And so what are some of the biggest challenges that you see new writers struggling with through the process?
I think one is adapting to the scale of a full book. A lot of authors who come in have written many things. They have written many papers. They have written many essays. They have done even short books. But to do a whole big book, it's a lot to wrap your head around structurally, and a lot to organize. And sometimes in their zeal and in their nervousness, authors can overshoot and like pile in too much. So having a sense of the size of a book and what's required and how it can be shaped, I think, is a big challenge, especially for first-time authors. I think another challenge, and I've seen it with filmmakers as well, first-time filmmakers will always feel like, I'm going to put everything that's ever happened in my life into this movie because I may not get another one. And authors can do the same thing of like, I've got this, I'm going to put it all in. And like, sometimes you want to say, okay, this is fantastic, but how about if this is a subsequent book? This really wonderful, wonderful thing that we want to go into so deeply, maybe should be in a different book so that you can really focus on this part here, which is the book that you've been contracted to write. And I think those are two of the biggest things. I think also too early perfectionism can trip up a lot of writers, because as we talked about, there are so many phases. There's this whole developmental edit that's going to happen, and a lot of changes. Huge chunks of the book might go away, and so it hurts my soul when I see writers in their very first draft worrying about should it be and that, or just don't worry yet. We'll get there. But just don't get there.
Yeah, present
So,
company included.
every company included.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And okay, that's great advice. Any other advice for keeping your stuff like organized? I know that I wrestled a lot with. I just found myself scrolling and scrolling up and down on the Google Doc, like I'm lost. Like
Yeah.
people have different strategies, like post-it notes on the wall, or a mind map somewhere. Or do you have any advice that you've seen other authors be successful with for keeping their ideas organized?
Yeah, I think oddly enough, within any word processing program, there are always the tagging of headers, which creates its own little outline along the side, and I find those really, really useful and productive because you can really look at them. I think having a running and updated outline can be very helpful, whether that's in whatever form works for the author. Whether some people are, like, really want that tangible note cards, that's great. Some people just want a separate Word doc. I've sometimes had, like, if somebody has the elements that are scattered throughout, like maybe there are lessons that are happening throughout the book. Sometimes it's like, you know what? These lessons are making it confusing to look at it. What if we take out all of the lessons and put them in a second, separate document? Then we can look at the main flow of the text. So can you separate things out a little bit conceptually, and you challenge yourself to look at the work in different ways? That can sometimes be helpful as well. But sometimes even make an outline after the fact to sort of say, okay, I'm seeing this, whether it's by subheads or whether it's by chapters, to always have the ability to step back from the canvas a little bit and see the whole picture in whatever way makes the most sense to the author.
Okay. Well, yeah, I definitely would change some things about how I organized and laid things out on the next project, for sure. Okay, so let's talk about the big one, the big D. Deadlines. Do you have any horror stories of like deadlines, like the authors who just didn't make it, or like what happened? Like the importance of deadlines, and how much of a stickler is the publisher on those deadlines, and what happens if you miss them?
Because who was it? Douglas Adams, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, used to say, I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they go past. So we don't want to encourage that. We don't want to encourage people missing their deadlines. But I think anytime that there have been problems, the difficulty is life. Much of my career at ISTE happened during the midst of a global pandemic and many other things. And we want the book. We want the book when we want the book. But at the same time, we are working with human beings that have things happen in their lives, and you can't judge that. You can't just say, suck it up, writer, come on, deal with it. You sometimes have to say, we really want this book. We really want this book to be the best that it can. And if that means pushing what we were thinking of was going to be the pub date, then maybe we need to do that. And there's a difference between every book is different, every author is different, and you look at it and you say, is there something that I can do to help you? Is there a block here that is a problem, or do you just need a little bit more time? And then you want to adjust those different things and help the writer through it, because that's part of what we're doing as editors, is to facilitate the creation of this book in whatever way we need to, and it's always different. So I would never judge a person for needing more time.
And that's one of the reasons I liked working with you and this publisher, is that you were flexible and you didn't really like guilt trip me or threaten anything. It was just sort of like, okay. And I did miss a couple of deadlines because of, I think, not exactly life things, although one month was life things, but other times it was just sort of, I had no idea of the scale of how long it would take me to actually write this thing. And even though I was supposedly a subject area expert and had done this for 25 years, it still took me a long time to find the right words, and I was still processing as I wrote it. So I just completely misunderstood like the scope and how long it would actually take. But it's cool to have that. Deadlines are always important. But the other thing I'm thinking is, what if somebody else comes out with a book of the same title and they beat you to it? So for me, maybe this is a self-imposed urgency to get stuff done, and I actually had that happen. I had another publisher, two publishers actually came to me years before I came to ISTE, and they're like, "Hey, would you like to write a book for us?" And I'm like, "I don't know," and then I just kind of like put it on the back burner, doing other things, and then I was ready. I came back to them, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, we already have a book on that topic." And so I'm like, dang, not that you guys were like my last choice.
No, not at all.
But yeah, timing, like somebody else might come out with your idea. So that alone is maybe a good reason to kind of meet those deadlines as best you can. So, okay.
But at the same time, it's never going to be your book. That other book that comes out, that person does not have your 25 years of experience. They might have a different 25 years of experience, but your book is unique to you. What you bring to it is so unique to you, and that's true of all of our authors. Mm-hmm. I think that's such a key factor in how we choose authors is what is so special about this person and what they've accomplished in the rest of their lives that is going to flow into that book. So even if there were another book on storytelling that came out the same week as yours, it's not going to be your book, and I wouldn't be threatened by it at all.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's talk about marketing for a minute. I've heard different things, and I've had my experience working with a publisher. Most folks are like, the majority of the weight is on the shoulders of the author to market this thing for any number of reasons. A, it's your book. B, people are buying it because of you, who you are. Hopefully, not necessarily just because of the title, although that happens as well. And like, your market and like your sort of angles, but most folks are not marketing experts. So what should an author, especially for the first time, reasonably expect a publisher to provide in the way of marketing support?
I wish that I could say, robust. Every publisher will provide book tours and everything. No. I think even at like the biggest of publishers, the marketing energy flows unequally, and so a lot of that marketing energy will go toward the biggest books. It's like frustrating. They don't need it. They're the biggest books already. Spread it out. It's just not the way it works. And I think for smaller publishers, it is still, we do the best that we can, but sometimes things are beyond our control, and and nothing is ever beyond the control of the author. And I think that is why it falls so much on the author. That and I think if we choose well, if we acquire well and choose our authors well, the author isn't playing catch up to build a community. The author isn't saying, "Oh, I've got a book contract. I'd better start getting fans." The author already has them coming in. The author has been doing this work for a quarter of a century, or has deep roots and deep understanding of the world that they're writing about, the topic that they're covering. That's more valuable than almost anything that any publisher can do. Having said that, we always try to do as much as we can to help to support the authors, to give guidance, to say, well, we have seen this work, we have seen that not work so well, or can we reach out to these people on your behalf? Some authors are shyer. Some authors are great, like you. You're like, well, I have no problem writing to anybody and asking for anything, and it's terrific. Others are a little more reticent. Like, well, would you like me to write to this person and ask them to blurb your book? Or can we send review copies to these entities? That's something we can do really, really easily, and I think a lot of publishers can. Well, we can share copies for review purposes, or we can support authors. If we know that an author, in our case, if we know an author is going to a conference, then it's like, okay, let's give them some extra copies because we know that this author is going to work really hard and share them and generate interest.
Yeah, that's great. And so what are some successful strategies you've seen either with authors at ISTE or from other publishers? What authors did to market their books successfully?
Well, you're kind of our poster child for really good marketing. I think some of the things that I can use you as an example for, you very, very thoughtful about the research that you did and about the strategies that you created. And one of the things that I've shared with subsequent authors is Michael had an editorial calendar leading up to the release of the book of what was going to happen 3 days of the week. One day it was writing technique. One day it was somebody featured in the book. One day it was topics from the book. I mean, that was brilliant. And I think I thought that is just some of the best strategy that I've ever seen on the part of an author. That was amazing. I think when I was in grad school, we actually did a backlist project where we looked at the activities that happened associated with the book and when we saw spikes in sales. And the biggest driver of spikes in sales were personal appearances by the author. So I think, and whether those are virtual or whether those are in person, I think the author being in the world in some way is a great, great strategy. Making connections with bookstores, making connections with conferences, making connections with libraries are great. I think what a key thing I think is for authors to own their own connections. Traditionally, publishers will look at social media. How many followers does this person have? I don't know that that's as compelling when you know that an entire social media network can go down or turn into something totally different. What happens to all those followers that you had on whatever social media network? Whereas if somebody has a newsletter, I was going to say on X social media network. And EX. But I think if somebody has a newsletter, has a community that they control, that they can reach out to directly, that's super, super powerful. I know of a different genre, but I know of a mystery writer who has a newsletter with something like 250,000 subscribers.
Wow.
Astronomical. And the way she did it was two things. One was giveaways. If you sign up, I'll give you a story. If you sign up, I'll give you this. So giving things to people is a really great strategy because it builds a reciprocal relationship with a potential reader, with a potential collaborator. And she also, like you, had an editorial calendar. I think hers was planned out something like 2 years in advance, with room for latitude, room for adjustment as the world evolved.
And by editorial calendar, you're referring to social media posts on a variety of platforms.
No, in her case, it was a newsletter. In her case, it was absolutely. So she had it planned out. For the next, I'm going to send out my newsletter every 2 weeks, and it's going to be this and this and this and this. And they were short. Yeah. But it was there, and I think that's a really great strategy for authors to have, and it's part of being part of a community as well.
Yeah. That's fantastic advice, and I just got some good ideas just talking to you, too. But yeah, thanks for the kind words. That's really great. But again, the strategy definitely comes back to the author. So your story isn't really contained in the pages of a physical book. Your story begins before the book is even published and continues long afterwards. And you keep reinterpreting or finding new ways to make the content relevant for new audiences and to reinvigorate people who already own the book and like, oh yeah, that book's on the shelf, I should take another look at it, or I should recommend that to my friends or my colleagues or my organization to read. And providing the value. And I like what you're saying about the giveaways as well. And I feel like that's one of the biggest fears of authors is like giving stuff away for free. Like you got to buy the book if you want to get the content. But I read somewhere that there's like a ratio of you could give away at least 10% of your content.
Even more.
Probably more than that. Yeah. Or something of value. It doesn't have to be a big thing, just a small, like one sheet PDF, or like I have a discussion guide for my book, for example. Like, if it's part of a book club, these are some leading questions you can talk about and make it help people connect to the content rather than expecting them to do all the work themselves. I think so. Keeping the idea that the book is sort of a multifaceted, multimedia, ongoing commitment. It's not just, I have it done, it's buried, I can move on. Yes, you got it out of your system, but for everybody else, it's brand new. So
exactly, and it's brand new every time. It's brand new every time you walk into an event to talk about it. There are going to be people in that room who have never heard about your book. This is it, brand new. They've never heard you talk about it. Yeah. So you have to do it like it's the first time you've ever talked about it.
Which is wild, because by the time you're done with this book, you've had it. You're like bleeding this book. Right?
And you think, it's a pub date. This is the finish line. No, that is the starting pistol. Yes. Now you've begun. You have begun.
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing that I've seen work really well for books is just when you have an author who is gregarious and who is interested and who is engaged with the readers, it's beautiful because it turns into a community. And one of my favorite books that I've worked on is Steam Power by Tim Needles, just like the most awesome, such an awesome guy. Yeah. And his book came out in March 2020. Just as everything shut down in the whole world. And a lot of it is stuff that really lends itself to being in a classroom. And yet, over the years, he just continued with the warmth of his personality and his openness and his just general curiosity of coalescing people around him. And now he's doing a second edition of the book. And all of those things that he heard from all of those people are going into that second edition. So I was like, I would love to have this. I would love to have that. I'd like to know more about AI, obviously. I'd like, I wish there were more on video or this or that. It's all like, okay, in it goes.
That's great.
And that's exciting to see happen as well. It's a continuation of that conversation in a big way.
Yeah, that's a really great way to respond to reader feedback too. It's just publish a book that they really want. It's almost like the first book is like your marketing survey, right? Taking the temperature of the market and going, what do people really want? Yeah, it's sort of interesting chicken and egg situation for sure, but that's really great. Steph, this has been a great conversation. Lots of great insights that are valuable to a lot of authors, whether they're first-time authors or probably existing and veteran authors as well. So this has been a really great conversation. Hey, if people want to reach out to you and find out more about your work and see more of your content, where can they find you?
If it's ISTE related, they can always write to books@ISTE.org. If it's for me personally, they can find me at stephanieargy.com. And I know it'll be in the notes, so I won't spell it out for you.
Yeah, we'll definitely have all this in the show notes. Stephanie Argy, this has been a great conversation, and thanks again for being my editor and helping me through. You're like the fifth Beatle for my book, even though there was just the two of us to help me succeed. So thanks so much, and thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
I love the book, and it was a pleasure every time we talked about it, every time we worked on it. It's just a total pleasure, and I'm so proud of what you accomplished. So thank you for letting me be part of it.
Yeah, thanks.
No doubt you found that conversation to be as inspiring and information-packed as I did. You can find links to the resources that Stephanie shared in the show notes as well. And don't forget to check out my website, storytellingwithpurpose.com, where I have other resources about publishing books and a link to an upcoming webinar for first-time authors. Until next time, I'm Michael Hernandez.